It's a way of kind of reaching across the board to say all are welcome. And I believe that in that radical hospitality of openness and welcome.
Well, Father Robert, I just want to start by really thanking you for agreeing to participate and to support what is now our fourth Calvary conversation, believe it or not. This year marks the 30th anniversary of your ordination, which is 3 decades of ministry, long time. And that kind of longevity suggests a clarity of purpose that I think many people could spend a lifetime searching for.
I can't believe that 30 years has come and gone. That's the first thing that jumps out at me. This was 1995, and we found some pictures of my ordination the other day, and being mid-July and in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, near Philly, it was about 113 degrees,
Oh, my
they say,
goodness.
that day, and inside the church they had no air conditioning. The bishop's vestments were ruined. He took them to the cleaners, and they couldn't even get the sweat stains out of them.
Wow.
I understand. So it was hot, and anyone who was there that day, most people remember only how hot it was. But I remember the service itself really well. The bishop gave me an icon of Jesus, and I still have it in my office. I've used it from time to time in some of my sermons. And he referred to love, L-O-V-E, the true meaning. He said, from now on, this is who you're going to be showing in your ministry. And he said, a way of remembering this is L-O-V-E, L for listening, O for observing, V for venting, which is a little funny. He said, you're going to have to vent from time to time
Sure.
in the ordained ministry.
I'm sure.
And E for explaining, a way of kind of being in the moment for people, explaining and letting people understand who you are, because people want to see who you are down deep. But I guess the big thing that has happened that in my tenure in the Episcopal Church has been the approval of marriage of people of the same gender. And
yes.
I was there at Washington National Cathedral on the day that we rang the cathedral bells on that day and had a celebration where people were married on the day that it was approved at the Supreme Court. I'm a firm believer in marriage equality, and so I would say that's probably the biggest issue that I've seen in the church in general, and I'm very proud to have chosen this church. I wasn't born and raised in the Episcopal Church. I come from a very fundamentalist and evangelical tradition. So when I came into the Episcopal Church in 1990, probably about 1991, 92, it was a real choice that my wife, Ann, and I made to come into the Episcopal Church, and we're happy to be here. The call to ordained ministry for me has always been about ascertaining and listening to multiple voices. And I remember my mother saying to a family friend who was Jewish, and she had me talking with this family friend, and I was a little boy at the time, maybe about 6 or 7, and my mother said to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I guess I said to her, I want to be a preacher. And she, being Jewish, she said, do you want to be a rabbi or a preacher? And I said, I want to be a preacher. So all those voices have said to me over my lifetime, you really need to think about being a clergy person. And so I did. I've never really had a call to be anything else. I love what I do. I have a passion for what I do. From a very young age, I don't remember ever a time wanting to do anything else. When I go back to visit my hometown, it's interesting, the little town and where I'm from near Pittsburgh, all of the churches that I remember now that were Lutheran and Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian, they aren't even those denominations anymore. They sold their property and they're just Living Water Fellowship Church and Bible Baptist Church. They're trying to drop all the denominational titles. When people say, I'm an Episcopalian, the public in general doesn't really anymore know what that means. You used to be able to say, as you move into a town, I want to go to the local Episcopal church. To say I'm going to an Episcopal church or a Presbyterian church or a Baptist church, you would understand generally what that meant. But the denominational identity is pretty much gone these days. So when people say Episcopalian, that doesn't really resonate with many people. They're kind of thinking, oh, those are the ones that really go to the country club. Those Episcopalians.
The President's Club, right?
The President's Club. A very influential book written many, many years ago, Christ in Culture. Richard Niebuhr talks about how we identify. Do churches fight against culture? Do churches identify with culture? Or do churches try to transform the culture? And there was a theological concept for denominations, I would say in the mid-60s. It really took on this task of saying we are going to be identified as ones who transform our culture through things like taking the words of Jesus very literally, feeding them, housing them, visiting them, the Matthew 25 approach, taking their needs seriously. Mm-hmm. So I would say the Episcopal Church overall had done a good job at that, much better than where I came from. The fundamentalist tradition is always Christ against culture. There's the culture, and we are against it. We're fighting against it, right. And that may feed some people's souls, but it doesn't mine. I don't find that overall that kind of an approach to belief really works and resonates with people anymore. But also I don't find people as a whole, they're looking for a church where they can express their spirituality and not just be fighting battles. When newcomers come here to Calvary, what they say to me is, oh, so glad to go to a church where we're not always being told what we have to believe or what politics I have to believe. It's a way of kind of reaching across the board to say all are welcome. And I believe that in that radical hospitality of openness and welcome.
So you've been at Calvary for a while now. I think we joined at probably about the same time in 2016 or 2017. I'm wondering how Calvary fits into the broader context of your ministry. How do you kind of see your time here as it relates to your broader ministry?
Every church is different, and every church I've served has been very different. When I was first ordained, I never imagined I would be doing multicultural work. In my church in Connecticut, we started a service entirely in Spanish because there was a growing Spanish community in that town. When I was in Silver Spring, there already was a large Latino population. So they had a service there in Spanish with about maybe 15 to 20 people on a typical Sunday at the Spanish service. It was a very multicultural church, and over the years, the church grew very rapidly, particularly the Spanish-speaking service. I didn't intend to go into the ordained ministry to do that kind of work, but I just fell in love with it. It just felt like it was a good match for me. One of the reasons I came here to Williamsville was I realized among my membership in my former church, it was becoming where most of the people there did not have my face, my color face. They were not Americans. These were people who came from other countries, chose to come to the United States with their families to raise their families here. And they were looking for a better life for their family, better education for their children, to buy a house, to own property here. And they needed to understand, they're living the nuance of what it means to be an immigrant here. something I would never understand. As I said, I'm from Pittsburgh. I loved doing multicultural work, but I also knew that that church in Silver Spring needed to have a clergy person who understood that nuance as well. They needed to have somebody who was also an immigrant who was raising his family.
Right.
So
Right.
my predecessor there was my assistant at the time. He was from El Salvador. He's now an American. He and his wife both were from El Salvador. They've now had 3 children, all raised here, born and raised here in the United States. Their family all now naturalized citizens here, but they lead a congregation that is largely made up of immigrants. So that was an important reason why I left. That's what we say, called away from, but what are you called to? What I was hearing here in Williamsville was something kind of in relation to where I am in my ordained ministry. I was kind of wanting to say that in my latter years of ordained ministry, perhaps, I would say I was looking for a church where I could just be pastor, preacher, the things that I love about the ordained ministry. I love pastoral work, visiting people in the hospital, helping people as they welcome new life into their family, baptisms. I love doing the work of preaching. The art of preaching is something that I have a passion for. And this church is a congregation that responds very well to preaching. You can just tell it in people's eyes. When I say something, that you can see what lights up, the aha.
Yes.
And so it's exciting to me to watch that happen.
And that's absolutely true. And I think just recently in the run up to today's conversation, there have been some really great examples of that. Yesterday, you went into what's called apparently Lectio Divina, or divine reading. Could you tell us a little bit about what Lectio Divina is and how you've used that in your sermon prep, and maybe how it evokes a different response from if you were to just ascend the stairs into the pulpit and deliver whatever it was that the message was? Because it felt, from my perspective in the pews, it felt very interactive and like you were unlocking levels of people's engagement with the text through repetition. What part of it makes it divine reading? Is it in the repetition itself, or is that an incantation that's doing something special? What can you share about that practice?
Well, the reading we were doing yesterday was about Mary and Martha, and Mary is doing the work of devotion and being in Jesus' presence, and Martha is doing all these things and is rebuked by Jesus, really. Martha, Martha, you are distracted by many things. Mary has chosen the better part. Lectio Divina is a very ancient form of study, of reading into the scriptures. It's not new, although it may be kind of new to people here at Calvary or many parishioners. I became more familiar with it in seminary as a way of saying you can go deeper into the scriptures than just simply hearing the story. There's a way of reading it repetitiously where you take it to a new step. There's each one of the steps is, lectio, meaning reading, meditatio, meaning meditation, to go a little bit deeper. And usually it involves more silences. Now, can't really quite do that in the middle of a sermon, right. But usually the meditatio portion would be done with about, say, 5 minutes of silence where you say nothing after the reading. And then you begin to draw meaning. What did you hear this time in this reading that you didn't hear before? So we did the reading, and then to ask the question, did you hear something that surprised you? Did you hear something that caught your attention in this reading? And then you draw out those words and phrases. And then, again, silence, then going on to the next reading. Same reading, different voice, usually like a different gender. And then as we go deeper, again, usually with a bit more silence than I could do in the middle of a sermon, it's a way of saying, what are you hearing Jesus asking of us? What is Jesus asking us to do? So this is the contemplatio. That's the fancy term. I didn't use these $40 words in my sermon, but
Sure.
As we go from lectio to meditatio to contemplatio, you're contemplating, you're going deeper into the scripture and drawing that meaning out.
You were talking about the Good Samaritan, and you took a little field trip during the service wherein we went over to one of our amazing stained glass windows that we have depicting the different parables and stories. And I was really struck by how so much of what you hear in society about the criticism of the church is part of the church in terms of the edifice, the building, that in the window itself you almost see the same critiques that people sometimes make, that the church is overly insular. It's a bunch of people who get together on Sunday and congratulate each other on how holy they are, maybe in its most cynical form, while not actually helping people who are in need and doing the work instead of just saying the thing. So could you share just a recap of that parable as it's shown in the window? Because I think it's really fascinating, particularly the character of the Levite, I think it was, and who that represents and kind of what it means for us on that day sitting in church hearing that message.
It's one of the great things about Calvary is our windows in the church do symbolize and depict many of the more popular parables of Jesus. The Good Samaritan is one of the, I describe it as the best of all the parables. It is the parable excellence. It has a hero, it has the villains, and it has a resolution with a strong moral that's easily understood by anyone of any age. It's just so easy to understand, and yet it's so poignant. The window that we have here obviously shows the Samaritan helping the wounded individual. But right behind it, and I hope we're able to show that in this interview, the window where you see the priest, the guy who's wearing the funky looking collar kind of thing, the very holy looking priest walking right by on the other side. And then there's also the Levite. Now the Levite might be considered, the Levites of the time were the class from which clergy were drawn, if you will. But in our context, you might want to say, what I was saying in the sermon was to say, you might want to say, they are the Christians, the ones inside the church, the ones who go to church all the time. So here you got the clergy, and you get the Christians, the fellow churchgoers, but we're all walking by on the other side when we see somebody and, sort of self-congratulating ourselves about how holy and what great work we do. But would we actually stop? Would we actually get out of our seats and go help someone? We'd like to believe we would. And then I came face to face with the story I told on myself, coming back from, I was somewhere in downtown Buffalo, coming back on Route 33, and I saw somebody's hood up, and they were standing there as if they needed jumper cables. And I said, in the space of 2 seconds, 10,000 things come through my brain saying, he needs help, but I've got to get back to church. I've got to get back. And, he needs help. Well, you don't have jumper cables. And it turns out, actually, I found out, I do have jumper cables in my back of my trunk. So I had everything that was needed, and I just kept whizzing by to get back to the church, to my office, to work on my sermon, to preach to people of Calvary about the Good Samaritan. And I did it myself. And it always just seems to be the case every time that text comes up. Something like that, something similar happens where, I can see something that's a need, and then I just keep going. So we've all done it, and I'm not saying we should, we can't always do it, but there are those times when that could have been a real connection with this fellow human being who obviously was in need of help. I could have done something, and I chose to put my priority of time over that man's needs. I mean, that's what it ended up being. So that's how I saw that parable that week, and that I used that illustration in my homily that week.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that priests make from the pulpit? And is there anything in your own preaching that you're still working on or have struggled with, or maybe have adapted over the years to change?
For the first half of my ordained career, I was preaching with a full manuscript in front of me. In other words, up in the pulpit with the manuscript right in front of me, reading it, more or less. And I would say around 2015, I decided to kind of just drop the manuscript and get down to the level of the people. Instead of going up into the high pulpit, I like the concept of engaging the congregation in a dialogue, a question. It seems to me that many of the gospel texts that we use, Jesus is asking a question. Who do you say that I am? Or who do others say that I am? But who do you say that I am? So he's always asking questions. And I think when I'm preparing my sermon, I'm usually looking for a question. What is Jesus asking of us, by extension? What is he asking of his disciples in that context? What is the writer of this gospel trying to address in his or her particular context? Is there something going on in that context? If it's known, bring that out. But for me, I just find that the questions the text is asking are what's critical. So what I'm working on right now in my preaching is the art of storytelling. I'm actually taking, I take from the great courses.
Yes.
There's one called Great Storytelling, How to Be a Storyteller. And the woman that teaches it, her name is Hannah Harvey, no relation. Okay. She is talking about how to embody characters. So what I do in the story, a couple weeks ago, I did a sermon here where I was embodying what I call first-person singular story, where I put myself as the character himself. I am, and I forget who the character was, but like in Holy Week, take on the character of Peter or Pilate or something like that and tell the story from that perspective. I like doing that. I consider myself a storyteller, a teller of stories, and that they become sacred stories. They are already sacred, but I make them sacred by putting myself into it. There is an expectation among certain homiletics professors, I guess, who say that you should never put yourself into a sermon. I don't agree. I think people are eager to hear how I have wrestled with this text. And so I often do put myself into the story. Like with the Good Samaritan, I'm there driving past on the other side. So,
Right.
And I'm not afraid to tell a story about myself that I might be a little embarrassed by, but otherwise to say, I'm in this too.
So moving to a sartorial question, if you don't mind, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your experience wearing the clerical collar, because that's one of the most instantly recognizable pieces of clothing or accessories that I think someone could wear to indicate who they are and what they do in a nutshell. Do you find that visual cue to be empowering? Does it open doors for you? Are there doors that it closes for you? Or do you feel like maybe sometimes it flattens you into a stereotype or someone's ideas about a role rather than something that helps them get to know the real you?
The answer is yes, both.
Both of those.
It's both of them. The collar gives me access to places where, especially if I'm not known, they know if I go into the hospital and I go in with a collar, that I'm coming there with a level of professionalism. We kind of know that you can be trusted for what you're going to be coming in to do. Mm-hmm. So you do get access. On the other hand, I find many times the collar can be a barrier to conversation. You're the professional prayer. You are the professional preacher. You are the professional God person in the room. And you're the one paid to pray, kind of thing. So I kind of get that from time to time. It wanes, though, as you get to know a congregation. It gives, as I said, it gives some access. It also gives some identity as far as our denomination. People recognize this is the so-called Anglican collar as opposed to the tab, which is usually thought of as a Roman collar. Right. So it does give some religious identity, and for that I wear it for that purpose. But some years ago, this is when I was in Connecticut, I was doing a hospital chaplaincy. I'd already been ordained. My intention was to do this hospital chaplaincy program, and I was wanting to do it without the collar at all. the supervisor was a woman. She said, try doing this just as Robert, and let your priesthood come from within rather than from this. And I love that phrase. Let your priesthood come from within. And so I just simply went, with a tie, suit tie, and I had a badge that said chaplain intern or something like that. And I would go into people's hospital rooms as the chaplain intern. So they knew I was a chaplain. They didn't know what denomination I was from. They didn't know I was already clergy. I wasn't Father Harvey or what have you. I was Robert the chaplain. And it really struck me how much freer the conversation was for people I didn't know, for people who didn't know me from Adam. Started, oh, chaplain, they tell me I've got a diagnosis here that I'm a little scared of. Can you pray with me about that? And that's why I was there. And it came much easier than with the collar, because the collar can insinuate a level of professionalism that feels like it's above others.
At
And
a
the
distance.
chaplaincy was more like, you're with me rather than above me. So it's a good question you're asking. I just happened to remember that when I was taking this chaplain intern program, the fact that I did this program without the collar intentionally. Let your priesthood come from within.
So something pretty interesting about being a priest, and unique, I would say, is that you have the option, depending on the parish, of living in the rectory. And this is not a dynamic that I think many of us are too familiar with in our own occupations or careers. So I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about what it's like living in the rectory. I imagine the commute to work is pretty straightforward, so that must be a pro.
Yeah.
Curious what other reflections you have on that.
It makes missing church inexcusable. We could say that real quickly.
Got to draw the curtains and turn off the lights.
Yes, and when the snow is up to your nose, there's no excuse to miss.
Sure.
That said, that's intentional. There was an expression when I first came here. They really wanted me, my wife and Ann and I, to live in the rectory, and it's a wonderful rectory. It's too big for us, with just Ann and me and our 3 poodles, but it's a 6-bedroom, 2.5 bath house. It's a big house.
Wow.
And so some of the rooms are vacant, but it also makes it handy, as you say, to be able to get here. It's also kind of a boundary issue. My wife and I have never owned our own property. It's a dream of ours to one day own our own house, but
Sure.
Everywhere we've lived and every church I've served, we lived in the rectory. And church-supplied housing comes with its pluses and minuses. More often than not, churches do respect that as a boundary to say when the rector is at the rectory at home, we'll respect that boundary. We're not going to go knocking on the door unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, by all means, let me know. If it's the middle of the night, let me know. But that said, those times are extremely rare. I would say here at Calvary, they really respected the boundary of the house as a way of saying when you're at home, you can let your hair down, what hair I have left. You can be who you are and relax and veg kind of thing. But we tend not to have social gatherings with parishioners in the house as a way of saying, it's a bit of, again, a boundary issue. I've heard clergy who some open up their house, the rectory, for church gatherings, some don't. It's mainly up to the individual priest's style. But we simply recognize that when I'm at home, and if you need me, let me know, give me a call. I have my cell phone here with me that people can access me at 24/7.
Right.
And that I will either come to their house or they can come to my house and meet me. So
right. Is there something that is in your job that you feel would surprise people, or is there a weekly rhythm? And everyone sees you on Sunday, many on Saturdays, maybe on Wednesdays, or during a meeting during the week if you're on a committee, but what's an element of your job that is invisible or that might surprise people to know?
A good question. I will say that probably the one thing that jumped out at me was during the pandemic. Um, we were told by the Bishop Sean Rowe, he didn't even want us in the church building when we went into hard lockdown.
Right.
March 2020, we were closed from March 2020 until May 2021, 14 months. I've never experienced anything like that in my ordained career, where for 2 Easters and Christmas cycle, the whole cycle of a year, there was nobody in church other than Kevin Durkin at the organ and me. That was it.
Right.
And to be celebrating communion, and Kevin and I were making a commitment to giving people hope in the midst of what felt scary. And Kevin Durkin, used that phrase to me, especially at Christmas time, that Christmas. He said, we have to give people some hope at this holiday time. So he said, what can we do for the community? So he played the carol on Christmas Eve, and we had Christmas Eve service as best we could out in the courtyard. It was pouring rain, and it was freezing cold, but we still did church, and that we tried to do church to hold on to what was normal in the midst of what felt chaotic, and then to build back a congregation from that. Again, it's one of those things that never taught us in seminary. How do you build back a congregation from a worldwide pandemic?
They didn't cover that? No.
They did not teach us that. That was astounding. How do you build back from what felt decimating? And that's the word. It felt like we were decimated overnight. But given the circumstances, when it was all done and we were beginning to build back the church, people were starting to come back, what we discovered is that people are attending church differently than they used to. It used to be that the expectation was you have church, you go to church on Sunday morning for your service. What we're discovering now is that we're seeing more people watching online still than actually attend on Sunday mornings. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
So they're coming and participating differently.
And that kind of ties into the notion of change and how the church can navigate that. And I would say something that we do pretty well at here, what started as kind of a COVID stopgap, and also to reach people who are sick or shut in and can't physically come to church, has expanded to really meet people where they are in terms of their habits and how they want to engage with church and with the community, both in person and remotely as well. After 30 years of ministry, are there things that you are still learning, whether it be about God, about life, about the role of being a priest in the Episcopal Church, or even about yourself personally that you'd like to share?
God seems to have a sense of humor when it comes to how I engage prayer life, being with people. It just seems like God has a few more things to say than I expected. Let's put it that way. What surprises me still among my work as an ordained priest is there is still a heavy expectation that we meet people here in the church in a traditional way, but it seems to be growing that there is an expectation that I be more entrepreneurial in my leadership, not to be afraid to, what they call entrepreneurial leadership, to think outside the box, like with live streaming and so forth. I'm hearing that the future of the ministry is going to be going this direction, where you may be seeing your clergy person beaming into your living room
Whoa.
I can't imagine that
That's
myself.
exciting.
But it may be, they say this is coming down the pike.
Sure.
Different ways of being church. I just simply want to be open to that. I find it's a little scary, a little daunting, a little nerve-wracking, but it's also, I think, God with a sense of humor saying, don't worry, you'll be okay. Just go with it and you'll be all right. And I find that that's kind of how God has engaged me in my ordained career, is with a little bit of humor and don't be afraid. And that's the number one command throughout that God gives in the Bible is do not be afraid. On Christmas Eve, the message is do not fear. On Easter, the same message, don't be afraid. So I think Jesus is often saying to me, Robert, it'll be okay. Just lighten up, go with a smile, and it'll be okay. And I'll be with you, and it'll be all right.
Right. Well, Father Robert, once again, I really appreciate this conversation, for you taking the time, sharing your insights and some of your stories and experience. I know that we have benefited tremendously from your leadership here at Calvary Church, and we're looking forward to many more years with you. And once again, congratulations on the 30th anniversary of your ministry, and God bless.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it.